initially was free.
All right, welcome everybody to what is the longest titled panel I've ever been a part of. We're going to be talking about VR production and the amazing world of virtual reality, augmented reality, and just immersive experiences today. So we've got a great panel up here. We're going to let each of them kind of introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about what they do. I'll start first. My name is Jake Carlson. I work with Manat Digital Media. We are an integrated business advisory and legal services company. I work on the consulting side in digital media and entertainment. My background is I was a producer in CG animation for a number of years out on the East Coast. Decided to get on the business side of things, and I've been doing media and entertainment consulting ever since. Next up, we'll introduce Karen Maliki Sanchez. Karen, you want to tell them about what you do?
Sure, thank you. I run the 5Rs Festival, which is the second longest title, the Festival of International Virtual and Augmented Reality Stories. We started in Toronto last year, and also we run the VRTO World Conference, which is happening in June. And we have a focus on trying to be disruptive as this whole thing tries to find its legs. So yeah, that's about it.
Great, thanks. Next up, we have Alex Barter.
Hey, I'm Alex Barter. I co-manage VR-Works, where we focus on gaming and live action VR. We're in the middle of the Paranormal Activity VR game right now. We also just shot what we think is probably one of the first feature-length live action VR movies in 364 VR. And we're about to announce 2 more games and.
Don't hit the table.
I shouldn't hit the table.
That was rule.
Does that bother everybody?
That was the first rule.
It bothers you in the back?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. By the way, incidentally, I actually I was saying there, I almost had my daughter's bat mitzvah in this room right here. It's very nice. A little expensive.
I went to my son's graduation here.
Right? It's nice, right?
I've been here before. Yep.
And we're off
They
topic
could work a
already.
little bit of a better deal, but anyways. So anyways, that's what we do. Excited to talk. Thank you.
Sandy.
I'm a feature television and commercial and documentary director. I like to change a lot of hats and direct in different mediums. About a year and a half ago, I was taken to the Stanford VR lab and given an introduction by Jeremy Ballinson to VR and had an epiphany that this was how we were going to start telling stories. And as a storyteller, I was thrilled with the idea of doing a film in VR. So we just finished a film called The Click Effect. It previewed at Sundance, kind of premiered in New York a week and a half ago at Tribeca. Our partners were the New York Times, Annapurna, Sundance, and MacArthur Foundation, and we have a little clip.
And what you know, we will really try to bring it to the standards, to the settings. And that's why now we are developing all these technologies to be able to be told scientists to respond to question. On this shoot, we do something, I would say, groundbreaking, because we use this new technology, this new 360 filming technology, to bring the ocean right in their living room.
When you're down deep in the ocean, everything is constantly changing, and there's so much to see around you in a real 360 environment.
In 360, we have to think about a sphere, which is three-dimensional, really. So we have to occupy all of that sphere.
I'm thinking that to build out the sequence that we shot yesterday, to do 2 shots. One is when you come out of the chimney along the bow of the boat. It'd be really nice to have a camera there to see you guys come out and swim past. And then once we get that shot, then I think we want to place one on the outside after you come out of the chimney. Okay. Go! There was something about the story of these free divers and what happened to them under the water that was really profound. And here was a medium that could transport you, could take you to a different world.
Using 360 was a way of enveloping people in that world and immersing them in the freediving experience. You could take them down 60 feet deep and at least show them visually what it was like to be surrounded by nothing but blue water, and to be enveloped in schools of fish and pods of dolphins and whales.
You know, the first time I met Sperwell, it just blew my mind. But I was not able to describe this to my wife and my children. You have to live it. And the 360 is always point of view. You know, you are in the middle of the action. You are the actor.
It's very similar to freediving in a way that you have to let go of control, let go of your outside surroundings, and just put yourself into this world and be taken on a ride.
Every project opens up a door to what works, what doesn't work, to dissolves work, how far you can go with storytelling. Do you need narration? Can you just make an audience experience something in a way that they never could? And so there's this huge responsibility to figure out how are we going to tell stories that people want to watch, and what's the language that will be developed to do that. It's very rare that you get to be part of something on the ground floor because there are no rules yet.
Matt, you want to go next?
Yeah, so I'm Matt Johnson with Bottle Rocket. I lead innovation. We're primarily a mobile development company, but really focused on user experience. So I lead the team that's driving to find out what mobile is enabling next. And in this past year, we've gotten involved with some partner agencies to create shopper activation campaigns, namely for Jim Beam and the Gear VR. And we're currently engaged in a couple of enterprise level solutions that are room-based VR experiences as well. So starting to see it come at us from a couple different fronts. Sorry, that was the slide talking to that. Exciting screens, and take it away, Dan.
And Dan Ferguson.
You can go to the next slide. Okay. So I'm Dan Ferguson. I head up digital strategy, business development, and consulting for Groove Jones, based out of Dallas, Texas. I'll stop hitting the table, by the way. We are a company that is focused in on creating short-form commercial productions for VR used for brands. So a lot of the work that we do it's commercial applications. If you swipe over to the next one, most recently with American Airlines, we head off an event to showcase their new Dreamliner. With Nestle, we are doing a retail activation, bringing VR to retail activations in shopping malls, airports in California and Europe right now, showcasing one of their new chocolates that are coming out. And then about a month ago, we launched the VR experience for McDonald's at South by Southwest. They were the super sponsor of South by, and they wanted to show how they are adopting to our digital and innovating within the company. And we ran thousands and thousands and thousands of people through a VR experience using the HTC Vive, which if you go to the hall over there, you don't have to stand in line. You can just go ahead and try it out there. And that's what that lady was doing. She was doing the Vive at the event. The next thing I'm going to show you real quick is a piece that we just launched at the Daytona 500. And it is a VR experience for Xfinity and NASCAR. And it tells the story of a man who is sitting on his couch, and that how they bring you closer to the NASCAR action. And you start off in his living room, first person point of view, sitting on a couch watching TV, takes you into the NASCAR event, takes you to the stadium, takes you down to the racetrack, into pit row, part of the pit team, puts you into a NASCAR vehicle, and then eventually puts you in the most exciting part of a NASCAR race, a wreck. And so I will say this, it is a mix of live action capture, 360 camera capture, and then the final 30 seconds is completely CGI. There's absolutely no camera work done in it, and that was the visual effect for the car wreck. We didn't have a budget to wreck 6 cars.
Was that for the Vive?
This is for Samsung Gear, which then is on YouTube and Facebook and every other device out there. So let's go ahead and roll that real quick. This shows the activation at the Daytona 500 where it launched. So this is being shown at every NASCAR event race this season. So those are real race drivers who are getting to experience VR for the first time. So it's a mix of live action, that's all live action. That's CG, 100%. Thank you.
Cool.
Well, thanks, guys. Well, I think the way we're going to first start off is just kind of ask, how did you get involved in VR, and what kind of drew you to VR? And Sandy, I'm actually going to start with you, since you're accomplished in the traditional filmmaking realm, TV realm. How did you decide to jump into VR?
So I was just finishing a film called The Human Face of Big Data, which is about technology and humans and the future of humans and computers, and got invited to the Stanford lab, and they gave me a $30,000 headset and said, this is state of the art, but with Oculus is coming out within a year, this is actually a year and a half ago, is going to be much better. And I don't know if anybody's done this, but you put the headset on, you're in the same room, it's a digital version of the room, and you're standing on, you realize that you're standing on two planks. The floor opens up and suddenly you're 20 feet above the ground. And it's so interesting what happens to your mind, or happened to my mind. A part of me knew that I was on solid ground. The other part of my mind was completely convinced that I was standing 20 feet above the ground, and if I stepped off on either side, I'd fall. And Jeremy Ballinson, who runs it, then asked me to step off, and I did not want to. You know, and it's this weird disconnect with your brain, because you're fighting with yourself. You know you're not hovering above space, but you really believe you are. And I stepped off very reluctantly. I fell in that world. Everybody laughed around me, but at that moment I had this epiphany that this is how we're going to start telling stories. It was so real, it was so visceral. And I thought, as a filmmaker, that's what we always want. We want to engage our audiences. We want to bring them into the story. And I was smitten. They said at the time it would take a year for it to really take off. And 6 months later, I was at Tribeca and saw some work from Felix and Paul, saw some of Chris Milk's work, and realized that in a very short period of time, this had already gone from concept to people who were making films, and the kind of films that I wanted to make, they were already making in VR. And I was working on another project which was about well and often communication, and called my partner and said, we've got it backwards. Rather than doing the doc first and the VR film afterwards at the same time, let's do the VR short first. And we, in a very short period of time, wrote a script. And I'd seen enough VR at that point to kind of know what I thought worked and didn't work. And the underwater environment was a perfect medium. And I think one of the things that we all look at now are what are the stories that work in this medium, because not all of them do. And I think a lot of times we're trying to adapt a normal story or normal storytelling, and that doesn't always work. But I had a sense that this world and this story would play very well in VR. And it did. We ended up shooting it in late November, early December, and had it done in 2 months and previewed at Sundance, which is, I think, a record for a VR film. And it was met with a really wonderful response. So I think it's a great introduction to VR. If no one's seen it, it's available on the New York Times and the Verse app. And it's a really interesting way to experience VR for the first time if you haven't, or if you have.
Anybody else have a hook on what drew you to VR?
Yeah, for me, it was just really the Kickstarter. I was just trolling for new ideas to put to a hackathon. But that aha moment, I think, that like you're talking about, that came was when I saw the toy box demo from Oculus for the first time, and knowing I was somewhere and another person was across the internet and interacting with me, and I wasn't doing it right at the very beginning, and I could tell he got exasperated and he dropped his shoulders, and his whole body language was communicated out to me. And I thought for the first time there's a digital experience where I felt the emotion of another person. It wasn't on a rectangle, it was there right in front of me. So I knew at that moment that bringing virtual reality into the multi-user environment was going to be huge for social, understanding more of why Facebook did what Facebook did, obviously. So
I saw Jaron Lanier speak at the University of Toronto in '93, I think. And what was really amazing about it was his attitude towards this thing that he effectively coined, as we call it now. And the next night he did that night he said that the book that inspired him to explore it further was by a theologian named James Carse, and the book was called Finite and Infinite Games. And that there are millions of finite games that have a winner and a loser, and that there are conditions of play, and that there are rules that effectively remove some people from it. And whereas an infinite game is something where you pass on this baton and you try to prepare the next person for the best possible pickup to continue that. And philosophically, and he said he got out of it when the industrial military complex started coming after him, and he didn't want to get involved in that part of it. The next night he played a concert, and he used a power glove to fly into a meteorite that we were watching on a screen. He was wearing an HMD. I can't even imagine what the lag was like on it back then, but he was really good at it. And inside of it, there were several instruments that had a sort of AI, a provisional AI in them, and one was called the cyber sax. And this was a saxophone that had a tail and eyes, and it would fight back, and he tried to wrangle it and play it. And he managed to play this instrument, and this is 25 years ago. And of course, that stayed with me. Years later, I studied cinematography at UCLA, and I was also running IndieGameReviewer.com, which I felt was in a very important space for artistic expression after the indie music scene, and the music scene was kind of going to pot. And there was this confluence of these things that were coming back that were artistic, and it was the indie game space was telling stories in a way that was uncomfortable with itself. They were calling these games walking simulators, because really all that you did was you walk through a rendered environment, but there was no skill testing or challenges that had to happen. You simply maneuvered through the environment and inferred from what you were seeing what story may exist. And I felt like, because we didn't know how to include these experiences in our top 10 list of games at the end of the year, that there was something that needed to happen for them to be better accommodated. And VR was really an answer to that. I saw that somewhere between the cinematography and all the new kinds of cameras that were coming out and these walking simulators, there needed to be a new thing. And right around then, we did a review of the DK1 Oculus for Indie Game Reviewer. And it was a 640 by 480 screen, and it was like super low poly and everything. And my grandfather, who used to fly Cessna planes in the Amazon, was just completely over the moon with this. And I realized something, that the experience doesn't have to be super high def, and it doesn't have to be super complex. It just has to be enough to kind of hijack your limbic system and convince you that this is taking place. And it can take a Cessna pilot from Peru and completely put them in that environment. So all of those things together informed me that there was time for a new language, that there was time to explore something that was bringing together decades of different disciplines. And I'll say that I feel like my contribution, or my part that I want to bring to it, is to keep us guessing and keep us exploring as fast and hard as possible before it starts to gentrify and get locked behind paywalls, and we start to define things too strictly, like what happened to the internet in 94, 95, 96.
So VR is still kind of in its infancy, kind of getting going. How do you see it gaining kind of mainstream consumer adoption? This year is kind of the year of VR. How do you see that hitting the masses and getting people to get on board with it for the long term?
Well, I think everybody's jumping into it. The question is, are we going to make the experiences really good? And I love what you said about sort of experimenting and keeping this period open, because there is going to be a rush to commercialize it. And so the question is, are we really exploring it as much as we can? Are we taking the risks to create this new language? And one of the things they showed me at Stanford that stayed with me was that they had you fly through this computerized village, this digital village, CGI village, and you had to rescue a boy from a burning building. And then they tested people, and they found that for like 12 hours afterwards, you were more likely to do something altruistic. So it really does have an impact on empathy, and it really does have an impact on a different kind of way of interacting, having a viewer interact with the experience. So I hope we don't keep it in a little box, and we really do explore what it can do and how we can change the language, because it's going to be a completely different language than we have now. And we're going to need a period of 5-10 years to really figure out what that language is, as filmmakers certainly.
Wow, that's, by the way, that's a really long time to say that long of a time. I don't think it'll last that long if we don't commercialize it. I sort of think that the commercialization of it is the most essential point. I think that while a lot of the marketing experiences which are out there are great, until you commercialize it, until people actually have value and will pay for something, it won't mean anything, right?
But that was going hand in hand, that if you don't have great experiences, people are not going to want to.
Of course, because if it's a great experience, then people are willing to pay for it. Yeah. But I think what we've seen so far is a lot of marketing experiences which are great, and now you're starting to see games which are good, and other live action stuff which is okay. But we'll obviously the devices are coming out now, and we'll see what people are willing to spend and how much they're willing to buy it for. I think inherently it's an art form, but just like the movie business is a business, you can make great movies, but it's also commerce. I think you have to find the same balance with VR.
And we can't rely on that scarcity model, because we ran a festival last year and we could charge admission because nobody has a Gear VR yet. But when everybody has a Gear VR, you're going to have to rely on a lot more than that, just that sort of premier experience. So we're constantly looking for how do you get people to go beyond the gear that they have at home. And one of the arguments is, why do people go to the Toronto Film Festival? They don't go because they can't get access to movies at home. It's because somebody's going out there and finding the deepest, best content that would never come to their attention, and they're having this premier sort of curator that's putting this together in a sort of program that makes sense, it's meaningful. That's just one example, I think, of how you do that. You have to, but I think Dan is like killing it on that front as far as like how do you monetize this or bring it to the mainstream.
Yeah, I think the PlayStation VR is a very important component on that, for us to see immediately what consumer adoption for a mass installed base is right now. I mean, it's not the top end of what this is, but I think it will give us a good watermark to understand what models traditionally or otherwise that we can monetize against. But that's where the people are, right? I mean, it's going to take a long time for people to get powered PCs to drive the Oculus or the HTC Vive, but
although there are a critical mass of people that have those PCs, and obviously the AMDs and NVIDIAs and Intels are really excited right now about VR just because it'll sell more processors and everything else. There's a lot of gamers out there, right? So on Steam alone, there are 135 million gamers. Now, how many of those guys have the computers that are able to run a high-end device like an HTC Vive or Oculus? It's not a huge percentage yet. But when the content is there and the content that they're willing to buy, one of our content was one of them, I hope, it'll drive them to go out and get the better computers or get the better processors to be able to really experience VR to its fullest.
Did you guys make a rail shooter?
No, ours is full motion. You can walk around. Okay. You can move with the gamepad, or you can with the wand controller, or you can physically walk in the environment. Ours is a 12,000 square foot house with 4 floors, and it's about 3 to 8 hours of gameplay. 3 to 10 hours of gameplay. Because
I would say like 90% of the games on Steam that people, if they had that super expensive computer and they managed to get an HMD shipped, are rail shooters. And it's disheartening after all that.
Now, but that's just because the Activisions and those guys aren't coming in yet because there's not enough of an install base. But hopefully between now and the end of the year or the beginning of next year, where you're going to see a lot of the bigger games which are coming out, ours included, you're going to see a lot more of those kind of titles out there that are going to answer that question. Because right now, you're right. It's a lot of short form experiences. It's a lot of stuff that's not great, but a lot of stuff that's sort of in the right direction. But I think we'll see when the bigger games come out and people have a reason to buy the higher end systems, then they will. And
Right.
hopefully we'll solve that problem. But you're right.
I also think that there's going to be two strands, and I think if it was just gaming alone, it wouldn't really take off. But the fact now that we all have phones and everyone's creating VR experiences on phones, that's to me one of the big game changers. And I think when the New York Times released their first one back in October and gave out Google Cardboard to 800,000 or 1 million viewers, and it suddenly brought VR to the masses, and that's where I think you're going to see the monetization when everybody who isn't a gamer, who isn't got high-end computers, when they can start experiencing VR, that's when we're going to see it adopted, and that's where you guys will figure out how to commercialize it.
That's the goal.
Yeah, I'm totally into commercializing it. So I look at the technology as to when are people going to adopt it. It's going to be completely content driven. It's not going to be based on the functionality. Wow, this is the coolest, greatest thing. If the content is not there, it's going to sit on a shelf. I didn't buy my Blu-ray player until Avatar came out. I didn't buy it early because it was cool. I didn't see the difference between that and a DVD player back then. Nowadays, when I look at the hardware that's coming out, I think advertisers and marketers are going to be putting the money into it to create content that's compelling enough. Good VR content, I think, costs money. It costs resources and time and energy, and can't be shot with a small team. That's the way I feel about it. You could see it visually. I mean, your stuff might look great. I haven't seen it yet, but when you see something that has been done that is very well produced at a commercial level, you can feel it and taste it and go, wow, this is what VR is supposed to be like. It looks great. It surprises me. How'd they shoot that? Where'd they get rid of the rig? How'd they get rid of that? The stuff that is probably 90% of the content out there is really not a VR. It's more 360 video content, and it's not really good. It's kind of boring, and it's kind of flat. And fully interactive VR, which is real-time rendered, is costly to create. And when companies like McDonald's allowed us to create something that was not a commercial, but a 2-minute experience, it didn't cost a lot of money, it didn't take a lot of time, but they allowed us to create something that was a commercial product. So I'm hoping that the word commercial isn't necessarily a negative or a bad word around it. It's all about good content. And whether it's brought to you by a brand or not, it can be great.
What was the experience? What happened in it?
So we shrink you down and we place you inside of a Happy Meal box. The concept was we're going to place people inside of a Happy Meal box and we're going to give them tools and tricks and arcade features to have fun for 2 minutes. Let's not market to people at South by Southwest. It's the wrong audience to market to. So let's allow them to have a lot of fun. And everybody, as soon as they were in there for 5 or 10 seconds, they all got the VR smile, right? And they start figuring out, I could do this. And it was a whole surprise and delight for 2 minutes. And when it was over, they had a very positive feeling about what they just had. And all of them were saying, wow, I really had a good time. And that was the great impression that McDonald's made on them at that event versus being marketed to. And it had some fun tricks in there, some great magic in there, and it was surprising people. And so it wasn't really a commercial at all. It was a nice experience.
So what are some best practices from a brand or an advertiser who wants to dip their toes into the VR space? You know, how do they do that in an effective way that isn't, just blatantly like sticking their name on something?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like there's obviously extreme sports and things like that when you've got sodas and you've got energy drinks, putting money into creating content that's good around that side of it. I think when it becomes a commercial, now Ikea just released an HTC Vive experience, and it's a kitchen. And you can customize the kitchen. And it was released on Steam, which is a giant gaming platform. And so you've got Ikea releasing a kitchen. That's it, it's a kitchen. And you can open drawers and change colors. People downloaded it. So that worked for right now. So we're in a magical time, this kind of window, could be for the next year or so, that I think you could put anything out there and people could be amazed and delighted by it. So I'm not saying that's the right thing to do, but the IKEA experience is okay. It's nice. It allows you to interact with the hardware that I just spent a lot of money on. So it's content driven.
There's a free app called Pair 3D, Pair, that you can download on the App Store. And it basically lets you, it looks at the room and it gets a sense of the dimensions, and then you can drag out furniture products from different retailers and place them in the room, and then once it's set, the scale is fixed no matter what. You can't resize it or whatever, so it has a sense of what the scale is in proportion to your photograph or your video input. And then you can walk around that furniture and you can see it in play in your environment. And it was actually developed by some military guys who had to figure out how to previs construction on Guam, where it's extremely expensive to bring in materials. And so that's another example of, but best practices, just to answer that question, don't allow the object to be rescaled in space. Figure out a way that you can say, I'm going to drag and drop an object that has a direct correlation to the image that we're bringing into the device, so that there's some consistency there. Things like that.
Do you guys see any tech, either whether it's hardware or software, that's particularly compelling to you, either right now or coming down the pipe?
I'd say the interactive. I mean, I'm not a gamer, but I did the Vive, and I was totally smitten by it. It is, you step into the world and you don't want to leave. And I think if we've lost a generation of video games before they're gone. I mean, it's
gone.
It's going to be really interesting to see what happens.
If you haven't done the Vive,
yeah,
it's
you do feel like you inhabit another world. Everything's in 3D. You can interact with objects, and it's really seductive. And I think in the same way that people go to games because it's an escape, people go to movies, it's an escape. This is the great escape. And I don't know, anybody who's in the space should read Ready Player One, because it is a good vision of where the future is headed.
So kind of ancillary to that, I'm excited about technologies. I think there's a blog article the other day about taking a third controller for the Vive and hooking a camera to it, and with a green screen, you can show a mixed reality video of what a person's seeing in the Vive with overlaid on top of a real background. I think the biggest challenge we've had is how do you get this in front of people? It's kind of bulky and cumbersome to take from place to place, and describing how awesome and cool it is on a panel is a difficult thing to do, but showing them in a video, and there's a great one that Valve produced that shows some of their work off as well. But I'm excited about any kind of technology that's going to help us market the experience, or kind of drive people to a little bit closer to understanding or desiring to try the technology for the first time, because I'm a little bit concerned that people's definition of VR right now is what they've seen on cardboard. When you're talking about at the end of 2016, 71%, I believe, of the experiences or headsets that are out there is going to be cardboard. I don't think they've really had a taste of what VR's potential is and what it's to become.
It might be actually good if they separate the names. I agree there's a huge difference between 360 video and true VR, and right now it's all being lumped into one category. Yeah.
Back in the Kickstarter days with the DK1, with when Palmer Luckey was originally creating the original Oculus, I got a chance to, we got the DK1 and we tried it out, and we hobbled together some tech, and I flew out to Oculus. This is pre-Facebook, and they let me come into a room where they had a room scale, a Vive room scale set up for them. So this was before Facebook. This was before even the DK2, where they had positional tracking in it. That when I got to put on the headset and walk into the content in a giant room, it changed my life seismically. It just was like, wow, this is, I cannot believe this is happening. And a year later, you can buy that and bring it to your house. And I set it up in my garage, and I bring kids in there, neighborhood kids, and and their parents are there too. It's fully, I got a chaperone, but people come in and they cannot believe that technology is available right now. And it's so amazing that we're living in a day and age that you can do that. 5-6 years ago, you started boarding a plane with a ticket on your phone, which was a weird experience. It was like, how are we going to get on the plane? I don't have a printed ticket. It was like you scan it in. That was a seismic change when I realized, everything's really changing on that side. And now here we are in the VR space, and it's happening so fast. And what I've seen happen over the last year is happening so at a rapid pace that even the hand tracking controllers are getting better. And so by next year, we're going to be talking about all kinds of new technologies that are out there that are, I think, are going to even rock the world from what we're seeing right now. But the Vive room scale, if you've never done it, it allows you to walk within an area and walk into the content because everything is being rendered live. It's real-time render. So it's usually using a game engine. And when I can walk in and pick up stuff, it just takes you 1 or 2 seconds, then you know it's real. And that's going to be the future of what we can experience in VR. And you too can have it in your house right now.
But it introduces the new challenge of locomotion as well. I mean, you've seen some omnidirectional treadmills that are kind of strange and clunky and cumbersome and dangerous at that. But yeah, coming up with UX conventions, I think they've done a good job in the Valve lab experiments for doing, teleportation. So you move that box that Dan's talking about, and you could walk around a new space in a new area as you teleport to that area. But I think we got a lot to figure out about that because it's becoming very constrained, even in my home, lighthouse-based driven thing. I'm constantly running into walls and getting tangled up in cords. And
I was talking to Alex about how they're doing movement within paranormal.
Yep.
And he has a solution, and it's working for what they're creating. And
Yeah, I mean, it's funny when you go out there and you talk to, all the players in there. People want to move in their own way, in a certain way, and for us, our whole principle in VR is you should feel like you're really there, right? When you walk, you don't jump 10 feet at a time. You walk, and so the reality is that we should embrace VR as a platform that really enables you to be in this environment, but actually really be in this environment. So it for us with paranormal activity, the most important thing is to develop a system that's a proprietary system that we spend a lot of time on. One, to make sure that no one is nauseous, which was the first thing we did, which we've been successful with, we think. And also to make people feel like they're really there, they're really in the house. So when something does happen to you, you really feel like you're really there, and you suspend all disbelief and you're fully immersed. And the way you move is actually really critical for that. The other thing is the way you interact with the world, right? The way you pick things up. What kind do you have hands in the game? Or are you just using the controller or using the gamepad? For us, it's really important to have hands in the environment, and so we want you to be able to open doors and open drawers and really feel like you're really in a house. And
do you have feet? I mean, do you have a body?
No, because there's no tracking for that.
Okay.
So for us, because there's no tracking. Now, if they develop tracking, and that's something we're thinking about, right? But it's not going to be mass adopted at all, because the Vives actually can track right?
Yep.
If that came out, we would have that for sure. It's not tracked. And for us, if we did have feet, we think it would be worse to have fake feet than no feet at all. And
there's definitely sensors you can get today, but the inverse kinematics and everything that had to go into it would look like this weird duck creature.
Unless John Q. Public has it in his house, we don't care, right? Unless it's mass market, we don't care. We're focused on mass market. We're focused on making sure everybody on Earth buys our game, right? And so for us, it's got to be something that people really have, and on Earth meaning anybody who buys a Vive or an Oculus or a PlayStation.
Alex, I think that what you guys are doing is extremely important and commendable. And I also
I
want
agree
to
with
throw a rock on I want to throw a rock on the other end of that and
Yeah.
say, why should we bother so much about just getting it right to be like another experience of the real world when we can also explore, in addition to completely different things than we've ever experienced before.
I agree.
And not just just for the sake of being crazy, because that's not fun either. But I've seen things like these kids that are, hackers, and they're taking Wi-Fi routers, wireless Wi-Fi routers, and modding them and using a Raspberry Pi and dropping an entire peer-to-peer blockchain network that is self-propagating with a tree in the center, and every leaf is another node that you can visit, and they're basically creating an alternate internet that is just pinging off of other Wi-Fi routers, and then you have a virtual metaverse, and they're flying through it, and there's orbs floating in space that are 360 video that is live streaming from all over the planet that you can fly in and out of. There's all kinds of ways to approach this that are possible, and these are 17-year-old kids that are figuring this out. no problems. And it's also valid, and it's not
Yeah.
commercially minded, and it's an incredibly important thing to explore. Another example that's really cheap and attainable is sticking a leap motion with a 3D printed mount on it onto the front of your Oculus and creating worlds that you're controlling with just your hands floating in space. So the leap motion, for anybody who doesn't know, was a little USB thumb drive size thing you put on the desk, and you would type and it would see your finger movements. And then they figured out that they could actually map, using the IR sensors, they could actually map the shape of your hands onto the wireframe, and then they would put a photograph of the back of your hands on it. So it looks like your real hands floating in space, and you can manipulate stuff. And there's a million applications for just that sort of thing. And my final part to this is, a lot of people with VR want to get really detailed and really complex, and I thought, one of the things that would be nice with life is to sometimes take a break from it. Even when you sleep, you have these incredibly rich dreams, or you might not feel rested. Why don't we create a world where sometimes there's a lot less data, a lot less input, a lot less detail, and just give your brain a rest and put you in some sort of like cosmic flotation device for your mind, and explore what that does to us instead of constant input. So there's just a lot of other things that have nothing to do with the real world or how it works.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, listen, with that in mind, I agree with you completely. I think that depending on what you're doing, you dictate how you approach it, right?
Yeah.
So not every game should approach their movement like we are. Not every experience should be the same thing. That's what the diversity is, what we should all embrace. And I 1000% agree in that. Let's have it free form. Everybody can experiment and play and try. What we find oftentimes though is that people will do VR experiences, games or live action that have no business being in VR.
Yeah.
Right. And so if they're shooting a 360 movie and all the action happens in front of you, what's the point of being in 360? Why bother, right? There's no point. So, and for us, we have the same approach. If it's meant to be in VR, then it's meant to be in VR. Let's not try to force, something that shouldn't be there. Just because VR is hip and cool and hot right now, people show up and nobody cares. For us, it's about let's make sure the experience is organic to what the content is that you're creating.
So I've got about 1 million more questions, but I do want to open it up to the audience for some Q&A. If anybody has any questions, please raise your hand, otherwise I'll keep firing away. Nobody?
Do you think there's ever going to be a time when there's going to be simulated wars in the streets by kids with augmented reality?
Did you say
Sorry, what was the question?
Simulated wars.
The question was, do you think there's ever going to be a time that we'll see simulated wars in the streets by kids?
Well, no, not game.
EVE Online is a pretty complex version of that, actually.
Create a war game.
Yeah, of course. Let's hope so.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What are the legalities of that? Do you anticipate it becoming legal?
Of what are the legalities of legalized?
So you have Twitter, let's meet up at this point in time, and then they have a simulated augmented reality war.
And then I kill your avatar.
An augmented reality, as long as you're not actually killing anybody, why would the... Well, maybe not. Maybe somebody, I don't know. But as long as you're not killing anybody, why would there be any legalities?
Running into the street.
You can run on the street right now. It's not like anybody's going to arrest you. I dare you. Go ahead.
Well, with the HoloLens, you'll only be able to see this much of the other army, so you'll be fine. Sorry.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the question was about the expense of, basically the head-mounted displays at this point, and the size of people's apartments. Are there any location-based experiences, theaters or arcade style?
What's the one in Utah?
That's the Void. Yeah, we're actually talking to a couple of entertainment centers about doing installs right now. I think entertainment obviously as well, but we think that that's going to be the sweet spot for us as enterprise or installations, whether it's at businesses for training, visualization, things like that, or entertainment venues. Those are the ones that you can make destinations and put them in there, and you know you're going to get that same experience every time they come in. So very keen on that.
Yeah, overseas definitely. We're hearing a lot about that going on from.
Well, arcades are really big overseas, and so I think that's definitely going to make the biggest impact within the next year or so.
Dave
It'll
and
come
Buster's
back to
and
America.
Hot Wings and all those. There's a bunch of different just like restaurant/arcade chains in the indie game space that a couple of years ago were investing largely in huge multiplayer experiences where you have 35 people playing on a jumbo screen and each one is controlling an individual part. And I mean, if they're investing in that in the indie game space, I'm absolutely certain they're going to do that in the VR space. There's no
Yeah.
question.
Yes, sorry, just one more thing. On the point of being expensive, it's really not expensive. You can buy it in October, November, whenever they actually launch. You can buy a PlayStation VR for $399, right? So right now there's 35 million PlayStation VRs in the marketplace, or is it 29 million? I forget what the number is. But it's a huge amount, right? So if you already have one of those, you can buy a PlayStation VR for $399. You don't have to, with the PlayStation VR, you don't need a giant room to really experience that to the fullest. And also, it's a matter of value. Like, you know, how expensive is the car you drive, and are you getting value for that car? How big and how expensive is your house? So it's all relative to what one thinks is expensive and not. The Oculus and the Vives all sold out already, right? And obviously, who knows how many units they actually sold, but right away they sold out. So
They're the
it's
price
clearly-
of a smartphone anyway.
Yeah, it's a price. I mean, what kind of phone do you have? Well, there you go. Yeah, so your phone is what, $800 right now, right? So it's all relative.
But I do have a Kinect in my house, and I really used to like the Kinect, and I never use the Kinect. When I want to be entertained, I don't get up off the couch. I can't be bothered. So there is that. I mean, I think part of the decision is like, do you want a VR situation where you're sitting in a chair and you feel like you're moving around, or do you want where you actually get up off your ass and move around?
And I'm sure there's a graph.
Not
that
everybody
could be
wants to do that.
Yeah, I think there's a graph that could be created for that ass on the couch kind of thing, converging with the idea that the ergonomics are going to have to improve to keep ahead of that, right? So it's easier and
I
easier. I
agree.
don't have to put the heavy hot headset on. Now it's glasses, and I think that's Moore's law, though. I mean, it's going to keep ahead of that. I hope.
Yes.
There's obviously a lot of ways people are talking about besides advertising and gaming. Looking forward a little bit, one is education. My question for Sandy. I saw Climax Effect. I thought it was great. I noticed the Department Foundation.
Right.
I used to work at PBS, so but can you or anyone talk a little bit about ideas for funding VR content that's not brought to you by McDonald's?
Well, there is going to be a really big move to education because it's an amazing tool. If you want to bring students to Peru or to Africa and have them, I don't know if you've seen some of the other work that Verse has done, but there's a one, Clouds Over Sidra, where you have to experience what it's like to be in a Syrian refugee camp. They actually showed that to UN commissioners who had never been to a refugee camp, and it had a huge impact on funding. So, we haven't talked about education at all, but that is going to be a huge component. And I think all the educational publishers are going to start looking at people who can create content for schools, and both in terms of teaching science. I mean, imagine if you're trying to create chemical compounds and you can actually go into the Vive and do that. I read a statistic somewhere that when you train in VR, the retention rate is 80% higher than if you read a manual or even did something online, but just when you actually get to physically do it and practice it. So it's going to be a huge training tool. I think we can't think of one application where it's not going to be used. So the sky's kind of the limit in terms of what field you want to apply it to. And that's sort of the beauty of it. It can be used for gaming, it can be used for education, it can be used for training, it can be used for marketing, it can be used for storytelling, obviously, which is where I'm drawn to it. But I think in the same way, I don't know about anybody else in this room, but I'm addicted to my phone. And as much as I don't like to admit it, I check it all the time. I kind of need it in my pocket. I think these devices or these experiences are going to kind of become like that. The big headset's going to go away. It's going to become somehow in the next 5-10 years, part of our daily lives, and we'll be able to switch in and switch out. But if you look at the evolution of all technology and how fast it's changing in the last 5-10 years, this is going to come very fast, and we can't yet really dream, and we need to dream how else to use it.
Yeah, I think journalism is also going to be an area where it just becomes more engaging for the audience. You see Riot getting bought by AOL. Going forward, it's going to bring a more engaging experience to the audience and kind of bring them into the stories in a way that is much different than the dying print.
And you go back to your answer, because I didn't really answer about where to go to. I think all the traditional sources that you went to before for funding for films, I think you can start to go to now and make an argument that there's a reason, an even greater reason now, to try to get them to fund doing it in VR because it's a wonderful experimental period right now. And if you can do proof of concept, and there's enough out there actually that you can then refer to, I think you'd be surprised that foundations and other funding sources will respond to it. They actually came to us. Yeah.
So the question is just how do you baseline cost when you're pitching a potential project to somebody like a foundation, since there really is no baseline market right now?
Nobody knows. And I've seen things that have been done for $5,000, $10,000 that are badly stitched with the GoPro and the software that will. And then I've seen things that cost upwards of $1 million, and it's everywhere in between. So, my argument is always go for the best and try to make it really well, but also the more you do, start somewhere. Don't let the cost or the technology hold you back, and find an idea, find enough money to get it done, and then use that to build the next thing that's better and has more financing.
Also, that you have an opportunity to bring an awareness of a project, a place, a person, a thing that is not possible in other media, right? So as Alex was saying, it depends on the content and what value are you bringing through VR to that thing. Because if you can make people pay attention to something in a way they never have before. There's an example of a documentary about the bottom of the ocean that somebody was doing. He's a very successful documentarian. He did stuff about shark finning and whatever else. And his focus in this case was how seahorses spawn. And that is something you could quickly tune out on if you're sort of like flipping through nature channels. But if you put it into a sense of scale and you have this vertical field of view, you only need 3 minutes to completely blow someone's mind about the little micro world that's going on there. So by doing that, you can prove to whatever organization, whatever body it is that you're appealing to for that funding, that we can have an impact in a way that's just not possible in any other way. And I'm sure the return on that investment is large because whatever it is, it's donors or whatever it could be.
Sorry, I just want to add to that in that also there's nothing hotter than VR right now, right? VR is the hottest thing there is. So every organization, every company, every brand, every one of these organizations all are in meetings. They're saying, what's our VR play? Because they're opening up the Wall Street Journal and they see their competitor doing something in VR. So they all want to do something. You just have to make them believe that yours is the thing that they should be doing. And part two of that is you got to have great big balls, right? And otherwise, why be in this business? I'll tell you one thing. As somebody, between me and my partner, we've distributed or produced or financed over 100 movies, 4,000 hours of content, just a lot of content, right? And it's not like VR is any, less risky or more risky than an independent movie. There's still plenty of people out there who are financing independent movies, especially considering you go to Sundance and there's 4,000 movies submitted every year, right? Or Toronto or whatever it is. So he's got to go for it, right? To sit back and wait for somebody, just go for it. That's all.
And to the cost part of your question, I think 360 video and stitching has been going on for years. There's already an established cost to that. Like you said, you can go up the scale on that in terms of quality because there's a lot of consumer self-stitching stuff that's going on right now. But looking towards CG stuff, the game industry can give you a good definition of what that's going to cost in general, plus probably times 10. I don't know, you could probably answer that better when you got to build out an entire world and can't use any of the tricks that you used to use.
Cost what it costs, but listen, if you're a good producer and you know what you're doing,
right,
then you can bring things in for a budget that makes sense. If you engineer your content in a way that it's not like you're building a massive universe with 1,000 locations and everything else, then you just got to be smart about the way you're doing it. The same way, again, I'm sure some people have a film background or a TV background. It's the same way you would schedule your production. It's not like you're going to go on a 20-day schedule. You're not going to have 1,000 locations. You're going to limit your locations to what's manageable within your budget and time and everything else.
But yeah, the point was we're not. It's not magic wands.
No.
Though. We have a baseline of experiences and engines and techniques and technologies that we've used that have built up to this, right?
Yeah, and you got to work with guys who know what they're doing and,
Right.
and have experience and can deliver. That's all. Yeah.
Now, there's a technique where you can 3D scan an environment and you can shrink wrap that environment on the 3D model, and then the actor would only be the physical necessity, whatever that actor was interacting with in that environment. Would
Right.
that expand your possibilities and range?
Yep.
So the question was around 3D scanning an environment, shrink wrapping that, and then putting an actor inside that environment.
Yes.
Well, the hackers that I like to associate with, they love to take Google Tango or whatever else, and they start scanning stuff, and then they start mashing it and data moshing it and freaking it out. I mean, that reason I like to hang out with those kinds of people is because they have great ideas, and they make a lot of interesting mistakes. But I've seen them take, they would take this environment as we were sitting here, and by the end of this session, they would say, check this out, and then they would put you in it. And then all of a sudden, you're navigating through the corridors and stuff, and there's a wall missing, and you fall. I mean, there's all these sorts of things that you can do, but you got to play. My thing is to play with this stuff. It's free a lot of the time, this technology. And then you can scale up, and then you can go and use the big toys and whatever else. But why would you use the big toys before you've had any time to mash around with it, too? But it is possible. Of course it is. And it'll be a lot cheaper if you know what the hell you're doing. It'll be really expensive if you don't.
Yeah, what we're thinking is, in general, a lot of content's going to be innovated, not by giant companies or by Pixar type companies or whatever, but by kids in a garage, right? And at the end of the day, this stuff you're talking about is pretty cutting edge, especially to do it right. But we've seen a lot of examples of it, both very very commercialized or mainstream examples, and literally guys in a garage who've worked it out. So
Like Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, and I mean, that's what they started with.
Yeah.
That's what they did. They made
Same
home
thing.
movies, and then you can see the iteration of those
progression,
into
sure.
what they did.
Absolutely.
So unfortunately, we are out of time, but before we close, I'd like to thank our panelists, and starting with Karam, I'd like to go down the line and get your take on what is the best immersive experience you've had so far, and what device was it on?
Okay, well, there's not a single one, but a really cool one is Apollo 11. And I pointed this out to someone yesterday. Apollo 11 is a VR Oculus experience, and it's really simple, which is why it's so cool. In the beginning, you're sitting in a 60s house with a shag carpet and an egg chair, and you're watching JFK's speech about going to the moon. And it's 4:3 and it's black and white, and we've all had access to it the whole time. But when you see it in the context of actually what it would have been like to sit in an apartment like that, in a shag carpeted thing, it brings tears to your eyes, because it suddenly dawns on you emotionally, like, Jesus, like, we were sitting eating, like little home cooked dinners, and all of a sudden the president is saying we're going to fly into outer space. So it recontextualized old media in this really powerful way, and I thought that was exceptional.
Well, outside of the paranormal activity VR experience, which is coming to a device near you, and the McDonald's experience we saw today, which is awesome as well.
Pretty great, huh?
It's amazing. It's really fun. The Martian experience is one of the experiences that we like. That they've done some really interesting stuff with innovating between live action and a CG world, and they spent a lot of time on that. So that's one of the things that we like and look at as one of the great pieces of content out there.
So I'll use as my scale, how ridiculous would a video look of you doing this while in the real world, while you're in the virtual world? And for me, that would be the budget cuts demo on the Vive. I've pretty much been tangled up in all the wires, laying on my back on the ground, and not because I fell, but it just required you to do all these crazy activities and motions and crawling to go around it. Very spy versus spy, back from the old school days of playing a game how I imagined it would be in VR, and just a lot of fun to creep around and play a spy. So, love it.
I'm going to answer this in a roundabout the way. I saw some things at Sundance that were just early technologies, but they really kind of thrilled me. And one is developed by 8i, where it's early stage photo capture, but you had two actors and you could walk around them. And I thought just the possibilities for that, where we'll take that in 5-10 years, is pretty exciting. And then also, company called. Company, I think it's called Realities, which again took a space, photographed it, and let you walk through that space, and it had the detail of a real space, but it had the agency of a CGI space, but with the detail of a real space. So combining those two is where I want to see what happens next.
There's a Unreal demo. I don't know how he got it, but it's a bullet time sequence of an action scene. It's probably 10 seconds of action, but it's stretched out over 2 or 3 minutes. It's pretty phenomenal.
What's it called?
I think it's called Hardcore, but I don't know how we got it. It's kind of like, I think we got it on the VR, drug circuit or something like that. It's really killer. I don't know how we got it, but we've got it, and if you can check it out.
For the Vive or for
It's for the Vive.
It wasn't the one running down the street that they showed at.
Yeah. What is that called?
The epic rundown street demo.
Okay, it's really cool. It's the best thing. And really, anything in bullet time and VR is fantastic.
Great. And I'd say Eve Valkyrie is a game on the Oculus Rift. Pretty fun.
It's great.
Dogfighting in space in an X-Wing, basically. So thank you again to everybody on the panel. Thank you.
Thank you.